The air near the campground outside Umatilla, Florida, hung thick and heavy on the morning of May 3rd, 2022. It was the kind of humid that promised a storm later. The atmosphere charged with a tension that seemed to seep from the very soil. Inside one particular camper, a faded white model with a slight list to the left, the day began with a deceptive normalcy. A man named Travis Thompson, 24 years old, was performing the familiar rituals of a weekday morning. He roused his girlfriend's young son, helped him into his clothes, and walked him to the bus stop at the edge of the campground. They talked, as they often did, about the important matters of a child's world, the merits of Batman versus Superman, the questionable idea that money could be a superpower. A fist bump, a hug, and the boy was on his way to school, leaving Travis alone with the couple's 2-year-old daughter, Jacqueline. Back at the camper, the morning unfolded. Travis made coffee. His girlfriend, Kristen, running late for her job, shared a cigarette with him. Their little girl, Jacqueline, with bright eyes and a toddler's boundless energy, played outside for a time, chasing a chicken and a duck around the patchy grass. The scene was a snapshot of unremarkable, low-income domesticity. Later, Travis would tell a story of this morning, a story he would repeat with minor variations, a story that would become the fragile bulwark against a horrific truth. He said he took Jacqueline down to the lake to look at the water. He said they came back, and he settled her on the couch in the cluttered living space of the camper. He put on her favorite cartoon, asterisk cat dog asterisk. He gave her a sippy cup and set some cheese nearby. He said he told her, "The cheeses are right there. If you want some, help yourself." He said he then went to use the bathroom and then, he claimed, he heard it. A thud. That sound, as described by Travis Thompson, was the opening note in a symphony of lies, a performance of grief and confusion that would soon shatter against the unyielding rocks of medical science and dogged investigation. This is not just the story of a child's death. It is the story of the hunt for the truth behind that thud. A journey into the darkness that can reside in a seemingly ordinary man, and the relentless pursuit of justice for a little girl who could no longer speak for herself. When Travis burst out of the bathroom, his story went, he found Jacqueline on the floor. She was limp and responsive. He said he called out to her, "Hey, you all right?" There was no answer. He claimed he then called Kristen first. His voice panicked, telling her she needed to come home immediately, that something was terribly wrong with Jacqueline. He insisted he tried to call 911 from the camper, but the phone, he said, simply wouldn't dial. It was only when Kristen arrived, he explained, that they made the decision to load the little girl into the car and race toward the hospital. En route, with Kristen performing CPR in the passenger seat, they finally connected with a 911 dispatcher and arranged to meet an ambulance in the parking lot of the Old Crow Barbecue restaurant from the very inception of this narrative. However, the threads were already fraying. The timeline, once police began to dissect it, made no sense. The official report would later reveal a chilling, inexplicable gap. 37 minutes elapsed between the moment Travis claimed to have found Jacqueline unresponsive and the moment that 911 call was finally placed. 37 minutes for a man who presented himself as a protective, selfless caregiver. This was an eternity of inaction. Why call the mother first? Why not drive directly to the nearest hospital, just minutes away? Why the delay? This was the first and perhaps most damning thread that detectives would begin to pull, a thread that would eventually unravel the entire tapestry of Travis Thompson's deception. At Adventhal's Waterman Hospital in nearby Tavares, the medical team fought a desperate, frantic battle. 2-year-old Jacqueline Schwingle was in full cardiac arrest. The emergency room became a whirlwind of controlled chaos, doctors and nurses administering drugs, performing compressions, trying to find a spark of life in the tiny, failing body. But as they worked, the medical professionals began to uncover injuries that were both catastrophic and deeply, profoundly suspicious. This was not the presentation of a sudden, unexplained medical event like an aneurysm. These were signs of massive, brutal trauma. A case manager, her professional duty and her human intuition colliding, made the required call to the Lake County Sheriff's Office. This was not just a tragedy, it was a potential crime. Despite the team's heroic, exhaustive efforts, the damage was too great. Jacqueline Schwingle was pronounced dead that afternoon. The bright, energetic little girl was gone. While the medical team grappled with their loss, deputies arrived at the quiet RV campground. The scene was now a potential crime scene. They knocked on the door of the camper. There was no answer. The silence was oppressive. Turning to the neighbors, the deputies began to piece together a portrait of the family. A couple with 2 kids. But the descriptions came tinged with a subtle unease, the kind of unspoken concern that often lingers in close-quarter communities. One neighbor, a mother herself, voiced a feeling that is often dismissed as intuition, but is sometimes a subconscious compilation of observed details. "You know how sometimes you just get that feeling," she told the deputy, her voice slow and confidential. "Like these people ain't normal." She mentioned seeing the young children unsupervised, often, which struck her as neglectful. Another neighbor was more direct, recalling a heated argument he'd overheard a couple of months prior. The woman's voice, Kristen's voice, sharp and clear. "Don't touch my kids." The pieces, small and seemingly insignificant on their own, were beginning to form a disturbing mosaic. Travis Thompson, in the initial hours after Jacqueline's death, presented a carefully curated facade of a devastated, caring figure. In his first interviews with detectives, he spoke of Kristen in grandiose, almost scripted terms. She wasn't just his girlfriend. She was his person, his best friend, someone he loved very deeply. He insisted repeatedly, a very selfless person. He recounted his story of that morning with meticulous, almost rehearsed detail. The bus stop with its superhero debate, the shared coffee and cigarette, the trip to the lake, the cartoon, the bathroom break, the fateful thud. It was a narrative designed to project innocence and cooperation, but the detectives, listening veterans of countless interviews, human lie detectors trained to hear the subtle discord in a symphony of words, heard the inconsistencies like blaring alarms. He initially failed to mention a crucial detail. That morning, he had taken his firearms, including a loaded R-style pistol, out of a cabinet and placed them next to the bed. When confronted about this omission, he dismissed it as irrelevant. "I didn't really think that would have anything to do with it," he said with a shrug. When asked about discipline, he claimed he would never spank the children, only give them an occasional pop on the bottom, which he admitted was ineffective. "They're relentless," he said of the children's behavior. His story was a castle built on sand, and the tide of evidence was already beginning to lap at its foundations. The decision was made to bring Travis into the sheriff's office for a more formal, recorded interview. The setting was designed to be less confrontational, a quiet room with a table and chairs. The detectives, King and another officer, began by trying to put him at ease. They assured him he was not under arrest. The door didn't lock, and he was free to leave at any time. They asked him soft, open-ended questions. They asked him to describe Jacqueline, very hyper and energetic. He said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Very outgoing. She likes to be the center of attention with her singing." He then launched once more into his story. The same story. A narrative that now felt worn from repetition. A story that still offered no plausible explanation for how a healthy, The vivacious 2-year-old could suddenly and catastrophically end up dead on the floor. It was at this point that the investigators decided to show a few of their cards. They revealed, gently at first, that an autopsy had been performed. One detective, who had been present in the cold, clinical room of the medical examiner's office, looked Travis directly in the eye. His voice was calm but carried immense weight. "The injuries that we're talking about are significant," he said. "I can tell you from being there and seeing them go through this autopsy that I don't see how they could possibly be an accident." They began to press him about his past. Reluctantly, with obvious discomfort, Travis admitted to a previous incident from 2019, 3 years earlier, where he had been investigated for breaking a child's arm. He crafted a story of a momentary, tragic lapse of attention. He thought he heard a knock at the door, turned, and sat down, only to find the child had rolled under him. He spoke of immediate remorse, immediate guilt. He was never arrested. But to the detectives, this was no longer a coincidence. Lightning, as one of them would later point out, does not strike twice in the same place without a reason. They offered him a lifeline, a polygraph test. It was a chance, they said, to clear his name, to show the world he was telling the truth. Travis refused. His demeanor began to shift. The cooperative facade began to crack, revealing the paranoia and suspicion beneath. "This sounds like a setup," he stated, his eyes darting round the room. His emotional presentation was all wrong. As one detective pointed out with brutal clarity, he showed no outward emotion, no palpable sadness, no grief. He displayed only suspicion, contempt, and a growing frustration. He wasn't acting like a man who had just lost a child he loved. He was acting like a man whose story was being challenged. The confrontation eventually spilled out into the parking lot of the sheriff's office. It was here, under the Florida sun, that the detectives finally revealed the horrifying, specific nature of Jacqueline's fatal injury, the detail that would trap him. "Her spine is broken," a detective said, the words hanging in the humid air. Travis's response was immediate and defensive. "That's not something I could inflict on a child." But the detective had him. He recalled the interview inside earlier. Without any prompting or knowledge of the autopsy findings, Travis had strangely volunteered that Jacqueline had recently been complaining that her back hurt. He had even pointed to the general area of her lower back. How could he have known that? How could he have known the autopsy would focus on her spine, unless he already knew what he had done? The detective pounced on this. "You knew specifically where the injury was probably going to be discussed," he stated, his voice firm. "You knew it was going to be somewhere in her back. You got to quickly say that's over here." Travis was intellectually cornered. His own words, his seemingly offhand comment, had betrayed his knowledge of the fatal injury. He was placed on an involuntary mental health hold after investigators reviewed text messages he had sent to Kristen, messages that suggested he might harm himself. The investigation slowed, but it did not stop. Detectives waited for the final, official reports from the medical examiner. The documents that would tell the scientific story of Jacqueline's final moments. Those reports came back from months later, in September. They confirmed the unimaginable. The medical examiner determined that Jacqueline's lumbar spine had suffered a complete disarticulation, a through-and-through break. This wasn't a simple fracture from a short fall. This was a catastrophic separation of the vertebrae caused by what the doctors called significant, gradual force. The official conclusion was that someone had applied immense, sustained pressure to her upper and lower body and bent her backward, beyond her natural range of motion, until her spine snapped. This was the source of the thud Travis claimed to have heard. It was the sound of a little girl's body, broken by brute force, hitting the floor With this irrefutable evidence, Travis Thompson was arrested and brought back to the interrogation room. This time in handcuffs, the dynamic had shifted entirely. The detectives were no longer fishing for clues. They were confronting a killer with the brutal, scientific truth. They laid out the medical facts in stark detail. They explained that the injury was so severe, the pain so excruciating, it would have rendered her unconscious immediately. They revealed the frantic, desperate text messages from the days before Jacqueline's death, painting a picture of a man spiraling out of control because his girlfriend was leaving him. The texts showed a man who, in his own words, centered everything on his own needs and desires, begging Kristen not to abandon him, his texts becoming increasingly unhinged. They presented their theory of the case, that in a moment of peak frustration perhaps over the normal, fussy behavior of a toddler, amplified by the stress of his crumbling relationship, he had lashed out in the most horrific way imaginable. He had grabbed Jacqueline and, in a fit of rage, bent her backward until her spine gave way. Travis never cracked. He never confessed. He clung to his crumbling story of the bathroom and the mysterious thud, even suggesting the ludicrous idea that the hospital staff must have broken her back during treatment, or that it was a pre-existing injury that finally caught up. He resigned himself to his fate with a chilling, self-pitying declaration. When told first-degree murder was eligible for the death penalty, he sighed, "I'm going to die." When asked, pointedly, who he cared about besides himself, he finally told a stark, unvarnished truth: nobody. In June of 2025, Travis Ray Thompson stood trial for the first-degree murder of 2-year-old Jacqueline Schwingle. He maintained his innocence, his defense relying on creating doubt around the complex medical evidence. But the evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The scientifically explained broken spine, the damning timeline of lies, the history of violence with another child, and his own preemptive words that betrayed his knowledge of her fatal injury. The jury saw through the facade. It took them just 2 hours of deliberation to return with a verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, the state attorney. In a press release following the conviction, released a statement that echoed the feelings of everyone who had worked to secure justice for Jacqueline, a sentiment that resonates with all who hear this harrowing story. Life in prison, he said bluntly, is too good for this kind of evil. The story of Jacqueline Schwingle is a harrowing, profound reminder. It reminds us that the most profound dangers can fester in the most ordinary of settings, hidden behind a friendly face and a rehearsed story. It is a testament to the sharp instincts of neighbors who speak up, the dedication of medical professionals who see the story injuries tell, and the dogged persistence of detectives who refuse to let a lie be the final word. Most of all, it is a memorial to a little girl whose life was brutally cut short, a life whose memory now serves as a somber warning and whose story ends not with a mysterious thud, but with the unwavering sound of justice.